Hello. All right. Again, I'm going to start off by saying I first don't have a wired headset because I'm using my phone and there's not a place for a wired headset. I do have a microphone plugged in, but it doesn't seem to be working. As for the products that are listed, I am using the gimbal right now. I don't like the fact that it doesn't fully center me, but that's all right. This is the kufia that is listed, the kufia lanyard, and I have the scrunchie as well as the bracelet on here. So any commissions will go to the GoFundMe's that I'm supporting. I tried to put up this really like MacGyver sign up here so that people know what we're doing as they join if they want to stay. Again, I am not a professional in any way, shape, or form. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm not anything like that. I'm just a regular citizen who wants to know what the hell is in this book. So today we are reading Section 1, Subsection 2, the Executive Office of the President of the United States. It is written by the same person as the first subsection, I believe. And I'm doing it this way, hoping that people seeing my face will hang out a little bit longer. If you want to talk or comment or ask questions, feel free to. I will answer them as I can, as I see them. So let's go ahead and get started. If anybody is following along, the document cloud is listed on my link tree. I also just recently today found democracyforward.org, and they have the People's Guide to Project 2025, and it's only 48 pages, so it's a lot less than the 900. I also have that linked in my link tree if you want to take a look at that. I also saw a video where somebody said you can use ChatGPT and ask it, like, what does Project 2025 say about, like, abortion or healthcare or anything like that. Yeah, I can say happy birthday to Aaron. Happy birthday, Aaron. Don't be afraid of women. Most of us don't bite. Okay, so let's get started. Executive Office of the President of the United States. Written by Russ Vought. In its opening words, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution makes it abundantly clear that the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. That enormous power is not vested in departments or agencies, in staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental organizations or other equities and interests close to the government. The executive power should be, oh, hello, light that just decided to turn on. The executive power is granted to the executive branch. That is not only the president. There is a lot more to it. But this is how they're lining this up, because if only the president has, I don't know what this light is doing. It's just getting brighter. So I apologize. And I need my glasses to read. So new stuff that I tried to get to make this better for everybody. I hope it works. Sorry if that's too weird. Anyway, the executive power should not be just in the president's hands. That is way too much power. We have a separation of powers and a checks and balances for a reason. No one person should have all of this power. And now the light is gone. I don't understand. Me and technology are not the best friends. The president must set and enforce a plan for the executive branch. Sadly, however, a president today assumes office to find a sprawling federal bureaucracy that all too often is carrying out its own policy plans and preferences, or, worse yet, the policy plans and preferences of a radical, supposedly woke faction of the government. The modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people. Except if you actually look at these things and look at what the majority of American people want, they want more social programs. They want more equality. These people are a very loud minority. This challenge is created and exacerbated by factors like Congress's decades-long tendency to delegate its lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies, the pervasive notion of expert independence that protects so-called expert authorities from scrutiny, the presumed inability to hold career civil servants accountable for their performance, and the increasing reality that many agencies are not only too big and powerful, but also increasingly weaponized against the public and a president who is elected by the people and empowered by the Constitution to govern. And it's funny, they're talking about these. Yes, I know TikTok. It wants me to use a wired headset. I don't have one. This phone doesn't have a slot for it, so deal with it, TikTok. If you guys can't hear me, let me know. I can talk louder. I'm a theater kid. I can project. Um, what was I going to say? Oh, they're talking about agencies and corporations that are too big. But if you look at the people that actually support this document, a lot of them are big agencies, big corporations, like the Heritage Foundation. That's a real big one. In Federalist Number 47, James Madison warned that the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced by the very definition of tyranny. Regrettably, that wise and cautionary note describes to a significant degree the modern executive branch. What are you doing, TikTok? The modern executive branch, which, whether controlled by the bureaucracy or by the president, writes federal policy, enforces that policy, and often adjudicates whether that policy was properly drafted and enforced. The overall situation is constitutionally dire, unsustainably expensive, and in urgent need of repair. Nothing less than the survival of self-governance in America is at stake. Now, if you look at portions of that in and of themselves, okay, sure, yeah, shit's fucked up. We need to fix it. But it should not be. It says here whether the executive branch is controlled by bureaucracy of the president. It's supposed to write federal policy, enforce that policy, and adjudicate whether that policy was properly drafted. And those do not belong to one branch of the government. Hello, light. Goodbye, light. I don't understand. Maybe it's the hand gestures. I'm not sure what's going on here. Anyways, these things, writing, enforcing, and adjudicating policy, those are supposed to be separate branches of the government. That should not be all given to one person. That's ridiculous. The great challenge confronting a conservative president is the existential need for aggressive use of the vast powers of the executive branch to return people, including power currently held by the executive branch, to the American people. Success in meeting that challenge will require a rare combination of boldness and self-denial. Boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy to the presidential will, and self-denial to use the bureaucratic machine to send power away from Washington and back to American families, faith communities, local governments, and states. Fortunately, a president who is willing to lead will find in the executive office of the president the levers necessary to reverse this trend and impose a sound direction for the nation on the federal bureaucracy. The effectiveness of these EOP, Executive Office of the President, levers depend on the fundamental premise that it is the president's agenda that should matter to the departments and agencies that operate under his constitutional authority, and that, as a general matter, it is the president's chosen advisors who have the best sense of the president's aims and intentions, both with respect to the policy he intends to enact and with respect to the interests that must be secured to govern successfully on behalf of the American people. This chapter focuses on key features of and recommendations for several of the executive office of the president's important components. So we're starting to lay out here that the president is going to have supreme power, that he is to handpick people who are going to run the departments, whether they are qualified or not. They're basically just looking for Trump loyalists. And then the policies and the departments can do exactly what he wants. They're saying that these departments should be doing what the president wants, not what they think is. It's okay. If your internet gets cut off, I apologize. I'm sorry. I will upload everything to the Play app afterwards if you want to watch it back. So they're setting this up to where the president has ultimate power. He's going to pick whoever is in charge of each of these departments, and then the departments are going to do what he says. Instead of, like, right now, the departments are not necessarily working to make the president's agenda happen. Now, do they? Kind of, yeah, because, the president appoints people. But ultimately, these departments should be looking at things as, is this constitutional? Is this the way we want the government to be run? And they should be looking at what is best for the American people, and what is constitutional, not what the president wants. Sometimes those things are the same, but not always. And setting this up to give the president all of this power is not how our country was initially set up. All right, so we're first going to look at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. I'm sure you guys have heard that being talked about. It's big things that have caused issues before. All right. The Office of Management and Budget assists the president in the execution of his policy agenda across the government by employing many statutory and executive procedural oh my goodness, let's start this over. Office of Management and Budget assists the president in the in the execution of his policy agenda across the government by employing many statutory and executive procedural levers to bring the bureaucracy in line with all budgetary, regulatory, and management decisions. Properly understood, it is a president's air traffic control system with the ability and charge to ensure that all policy initiatives are flying in sync and with the authority to let planes take off and at times ground planes that are flying off course. OMB's key roles include, and remember, this is like a job description for what they want this department to be. This is not what the department is currently. Developing and enforcing the president's budget and executing the appropriation laws that fund the government, managing agency and personnel performance, procurement policy, financial management, and information technology, developing the president's regulatory agenda, reviewing new regulatory actions, reviewing federal information collections, and setting and enforcing federal information policy. So now the Office of Management and Budget is going to set and enforce policy. And coordinating and clearing agency communications with Congress, including testimonies and views on draft legislation. OMB cannot perform its role on behalf of the president effectively if it is not intimately involved in all aspects of the White House policy process and lacks knowledge of what the agencies are doing. Internally to the EOP, ensuring that the policy formulation procedures developed by the White House to serve the president include OMB is one of any OMB director's major responsibilities. A common meme of those who intend to evade OMB review is to argue that where resources are not being discussed, OMB's participation is optional. This ignores both OMB's role in all downstream execution and the reality that it has only statutory tools in the White House that are powerful enough to override implementing agencies' bureaucracies. The director must view his job as the best, most comprehensive approximation of the president's mind as it pertains to the policy agenda, while always being ready with actual options to affect that agenda within existing legal authorities and resources. This role cannot be performed adequately if the director acts instead as the ambassador of the institutional interests of OMB and the wider bureaucracy to the White House. Once its reputation as the keeper of commander's intent is established, then and only then does OMB have the ability to shape the most efficient way to pursue an objective. Externally, the director must ensure that OMB has sufficient visibility into the deep caverns of agency decision-making. One indispensable statutory tool to that end is to ensure that policy officials, the program associate directors, managing the vast resource management offices, personally sign what are known as the apportionments. In 1870, Congress passed the Anti-Deficiency Act to prevent the common agency practice of spending down all appropriated funding, creating artificial funding shortfalls that Congress would have to fill. The law mandated that all funding be allotted or apportioned in installments. This process, whereby agencies come to OMB for allotments of appropriated funds, is essential to the effective financial stewardship of taxpayer dollars. Because any of our politicians are using our dollars correctly, right? OMB can then direct on behalf of a president the amount, duration, and purpose of any apportioned funds funding to ensure against waste. I know, TikTok. Fraud and abuse, and ensure consistency with the president's agenda and applicable laws. The vast majority of these apportionments were signed by career officials. The deputy associate directors, until the Trump administration placed this responsibility in the hand of the program associate directors, and thereby opened wide vistas of oversight that had escaped the attention of policy officials. The Biden administration subsequently reversed this decision. No director should be chosen who is unwilling to restore apportionment decision-making to the program associate directors, personal review, who is not aggressive in wielding the tool on behalf of the president's agenda, or who is unable to defend the power against attacks from Congress. So, right there, this person should do what the president says, regardless of what Congress says. Nobody should have all that power. It should be noted that each of OMB's primary functions, along with other executive and statutory roles, is carried out with the help of many essential OMB support offices. The two most important offices for moving OMB at the will of a director are the Budget Review Division and the Office of General Counsel. The director should have a direct and effective relationship with the head of the Budget Review Division, considered the top career official within OMB, and transmit most instructions through that office because the rest of the agency is institutionally inclined toward its direction and responds accordingly. The Budget Review Division inevitably will translate the directions from policy officials to the career staff, and at every stage, it is obviously vital that the director ensures that this translation is an accurate one. In addition, many key considerations involved in enacting a president's agenda hinge on existing legal authorities. The director must ensure the appointment of a general counsel who is respected yet creative and fearless in his or her ability to challenge legal precedents that serve to protect the status quo. This is vital within OMB, not only with respect to the adequate development of policy options for the president's review, but also with respect to agencies that attempt to protect their own institutional interests and foreclose certain avenues based on the mere assertion and not proof that the law disallows it, or that, conversely, attempt to disregard the clear statutory commands of Congress. In general, the director should empower a strong deputy director with authority over the deputy for management, the PADs, and the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, to work diligently to break down barriers within OMB and not allow turf disputes or a lack of visibility to undermine the agency's principal budget, management, and regulatory functions. OMB should work toward a one OMB position on behalf of the president and represent that view during the various policy-making processes. Now, budget under OMB. The United States today faces an untenable fiscal situation and owes $31 trillion on a debt that is steadily increasing. The OMB director should present a fiscal goal to the president early in the budget development process to address the federal government's fiscal irresponsibility. This goal would help to align the months-long process of developing the actual proposals for inclusion in the budget. Though some mistakenly regard it as a mere paper-pushing exercise, the president's budget is in fact a powerful mechanism for setting and enforcing public policy at federal agencies. The budget team includes 6 resource management offices that, together with the BRD and other components, help the director of OMB to develop and execute detailed agency spending plans that bear on every major aspect of policy formation and execution at federal agencies. Through initial priority setting and ongoing supervision of agency spending, OMB's budget team plays a key role in executing policy across the executive branch, including at many agencies wrongly regarded as independent. Sorry, I need to readjust here. I know this is not the most interesting information, but it's so important for us to have some kind of idea about what this whole thing means. It's really, really going to change the whole landscape of our country. And if we're not informed, then we might vote incorrectly and end up under this regime, and that's scary. The RMOs, of each of which is led by a political appointee known as the PAD and a career DAD. Those are the names I said earlier. I'm not scrolling back 2 pages to find them, are separated into 6 functional units. National security. Now, we're still under the Office of Management and Budget, which, to my understanding, doesn't have a lot of power now. Listen to the power they want to give this. 6 functional units: national security, national resource, energy and science, health, education, income, maintenance and labor, transportation, justice and homeland security, treasure, commerce, and housing. So now that department is going to have a lot of power, a lot of say. And they control the money. Because the RMOs are institutionally ingrained in nearly all policymaking and implementation across the executive branch, they play a critical role in helping the director to implement the president's public policy agenda. However, because each RMO is responsible for formulating and supervising such a wide range of policy details, many granular but critical policy decisions are effectively left to the career professionals who serve across administrations. And again, they are keeping this very vague on purpose because it allows them to then do with it what they see fit and claim that it was part of their plan all along. To enhance the OMB director's ability to help the president drive policy at the agencies, the existing 6 RMOs should be divided into smaller subject matter areas, allowing for more PADs, and each of these PADs should have a deputy PAD. This expanded pool of RMOs with additional political leadership would enable a more comprehensive direction and oversight of policy development and implementation. Regardless of whether Congress adopts the president's full set of budget recommendations, the president should reintroduce the concept of administrative pay-as-you-go, or administrative pay-go. This simple procedure requirement imposes budget neutrality on the discretionary choices of federal agencies, of which there are many in nearly all areas of policymaking. This simple step forces the executive branch to control what it can control. The principle may occasionally yield to other overarching requirements, such as the presidential regulatory budget, but in nearly all cases, administrative pay-go plays a unique and indispensable role in enforcing fiscal responsibility at federal departments and agencies. The president should use every possible tool to propose and impose fiscal discipline on the federal government. Anything short of that would constitute abject failure. So, the president is going to impose fiscal discipline. The president, Donald Trump, who's filed for bankruptcy several times, who just got convicted of campaign fraud. This guy, this one person, is going to be in charge in proposing and imposing fiscal discipline on the federal government. In management, the Management Office of OMB, the M side, as it is often called, is responsible for carrying out several important agency oversight functions, many of which are statutory. The management team includes the following offices led by presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed individuals: the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, the Office of Performance and Personnel Management, the Office of Federal Finance Management, the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer, and Made in America Office, which was added by the Biden administration and is not a Senate-confirmed slot, which means he can put whoever he wants in there. So if the Senate ends up being democratically led, he can just put whoever he wants in there. Each of these offices has responsibilities and authorities that a president can use to help drive policy across the government. It is vital that the director and his political staff, not the careerists, drive these offices in pursuit of the president's actual priorities and not let them set their own agenda based on the wishes of the sprawling good government management community in and outside of government. Many directors do not properly prioritize the management portfolio, leaving it to the deputy for management. But such neglect creates purposeless bureaucracy that impedes the president's agenda, an M train to nowhere. All right, so OFPP is the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. This office plays a critical role in leading the development of new policies and regulations concerning federal contracting and procurement. Through the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, which is generally chaired by the OFPP administrator, OFPP helps the director to set a wide range of policies for all of those who contract with the executive branch. In the past, those government-wide contracting rules have played a key role in helping to implement the president's policy agenda. This office should be engaged early and often in OMB's effort to drive policy, including by obtaining transparency about entities that are awarded federal contracts and grants, and by using government contracts to push back against woke policies in corporate America. Yes, I know. Don't have a wired headset, TikTok. If you guys can't hear me, let me know. I can project. All right. Next one. The Office of Performance and Personal Management is OPPM. Through this office, the director helps federal agencies to establish their performance goals and performance review processes. OPPM also works within the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, to establish and manage personnel policies and practices across the federal government. The director should instruct OPPM to establish annual performance goals and review processes for agencies that reflect the president's agenda. OPPM should also be part of the president's strategy to set and enforce sensible policies and practices for the federal workforce. I want you to pay attention to how often they talk about the president's agenda, not what is best for the people, not what is constitutional, the president's agenda. So what he wants to do, even though sometimes they flower in words about being constitutional or what the American people want, overwhelmingly, they only talk about the president's agenda. And granted, we all would love for the president's agenda to be what is best for the American people, but we know better. We know that's not the case. So the fact that this whole document is set to prop up a president and make him have all of this power and then use him as a puppet to do whatever these businesses and individuals and one percenters want to happen is terrifying. All right, the next office is OFFM, which is the Office of Federal Financial Management. This office helps the director to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in federal programs. Funny, considering the president is going to be running that and he's already gotten in trouble for misusing funds. For example, through the Do Not Pay program, it should be part of efforts to save precious taxpayer resources. Again, being very vague. So are they talking about you and me when they're talking about taxpayers? Or are they talking about Bezos and Musk and all of the 1%? Are they talking? They don't specify. They leave it vague so they can do what they want. The next office is OFCIO, which is the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer. That last office had 2 sentences. And that's supposed to tell us what this office is going to do. So what did I say? This was the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer, OFCIO. This office guides the federal government's use and adoption of internet-based technologies to improve government operations and save taxpayer money. As a function of its leadership role, it is critical in intra-agency discussions on a wide range of technology issues. The office, thus, is an important part of the president's effort to modernize, strengthen, and set technology adoption policies for the executive branch. And then MIAO, the Made in America office. Building on the example and work of the Trump administration, President Biden established this office to centralize, carry out, and further develop the federal government's Buy American and other Made in America commitments. Its work ought to be continued and further strengthened. Which is, again, great in theory. But these business people want to make their products as cheap as they possibly can. And if that means having it made somewhere else, they're not going to change that. And there's no way that Trump's going to force them to do that. All right, so now we're looking at regulatory and information policy, still under OMB. OMB's OIRA was Office of Information Resources, I believe. Yeah. Okay. It plays an enormous and vital role in reining in the regulatory state and ensuring that regulations achieve important benefits while imposing minimal burdens on Americans. The President should maintain Executive Order 12866, the foundation of OIRA's review of regulatory actions. The administration should likewise maintain the recent extension of those standards to regulatory actions of the U.S. Department of Treasury, regulatory analysis, and OIRA review. Cool. Hang up the phone, drop the water. All's good. All right. The administration should likewise maintain the recent extension of those extensions to regulatory actions of the U.S. Department of Treasury. Regulatory analysis and OIRA review should also be required of the historically independent agencies, as the Office of Legal Counsel has found is legally permissible. If the current administration proceeds with its declared intent to modify aspects of Executive Order 12866 or review OMB's Circular A4, the related document that provides the foundation for cost-benefit analysis, the next president should immediately begin to undo those changes and develop a rigorous, data-driven approach that will result in the least burdensome rules possible. The next president should also revive the directive in Executive Order 13891 that significant guidance documents also must pass through OIRA review. Because OIRA review often leads to fewer regulatory burdens, more regulatory benefits, and better coordination of regulatory policy, funding for OIRA tends to pay large dividends. Yet over the years, funding for OIRA has diminished. This trend should be reversed. The budget should also include sufficient full-time equivalent FTE employees to form regulatory advanced teams that would consult with agencies on cost-benefit analysis and good regulatory practices at the beginning of the rulemaking process for the most important regulations. These teams would help agencies take cost-benefit analysis into account from the beginning of their rulemaking efforts, which in turn would result in higher quality regulations and a swifter eventual OIRA review. To preserve the integrity of OIRA review, the staff who consult at the beginning of a rulemaking should not handle its eventual review. The next president should also reinstate the many executive orders signed by President Trump that were designed to make the regulatory process more just, efficient, and transparent. Executive orders 13771, 13777, 13891, 13892, 13893, 13924 Section 6, 13979, and 13980 should be revived with modifications as needed. Executive Order 13132 on federalism should be strengthened so that state regulatory and fiscal operations are not commandeered by the federal government through so-called cooperative federalism programs. Initially, the president should revise and sign an updated version of President Ronald Reagan's Executive Order 12630 on federal takings. What is that? They tag it too, but what is that? Executive Order 12630. All right, so this executive order, government actions and interference with constitutionally protected property rights. Revise and sign an updated version, but they don't say what they want the updated version to look like, right? So let's look at what this executive order says. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, and in order to ensure that government actions are undertaken on a well-reasoned basis with due regard for fiscal accountability for the financial impacts of the obligations imposed on the federal government by the Just Compensation Clause of the Fifth Amendment, and for Constitution, it is hereby ordered as follows. Section 1, Purpose. The Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution provides that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. government historically has used the formal exercise of the power of eminent domain, which provides orderly process for paying just compensation, to acquire private property for public use. Recent Supreme Court decisions, however, mind you, this was in 1988, however, in reaffirming the fundamental protection of private property rights provided by the Fifth Amendment, and in assessing the nature of governmental actions that have an impact on constitutionally protected property rights, have also reaffirmed that governmental actions that do not formally invoke the condemnation power, including regulations, may result in taking for which just compensation is required. Okay, so they're saying if the government takes your property, they have to pay you for it. How do they want to edit and revise this, that the government doesn't have to pay you for it, that they can just come in and take your property? This is what's scary, is that this document is so vague that they really could do anything with it. They say they want to revise this, but they don't say how they want to revise this. Hopefully it's not that the government can come just take everything that you own, but it is possible that that's what they're thinking. Responsible fiscal management and fundamental principles of good government require that government decision makers evaluate carefully the effect of their administrative, regulatory, and legislative actions on constitutionally protected property rights. It's basically just kind of going into more detail about the same thing. A bunch of definitions. So who knows? Maybe they want to modify it that, I don't know, that the government pays you more for your property if they have to take it for public use, but I highly doubt that's what their plan is. The next president, we're back to Project 2025. The next president should strengthen implementation of the Information Quality Act, robustly use the authority of the Paperwork Reduction Act, carefully enforce the Privacy Act, and ensure the sound execution of OIRA statistical and other information policy functions. Again, super vague. So they want to strengthen the Information Quality Act. How? Robustly use the authority of the Paperwork Reduction Act. How? Carefully enforce the Privacy Act. How? We have no idea what their actual plan is when it comes down to details. Enforcing the Privacy Act could be taking our privacy away for all we know. I hope that's not it, but it's possible. Regulatory cooperation agreements can also promote the further adoption of good regulatory practices, which improve market conditions for America and her allies. OIRA should also work with other components of OMB to revise and apply OMB's uniform guidance for grants and agreements, and ensure that federal contract and grant guidelines satisfy Executive Order 12866 and other centralized standards as appropriate. They're real big on this 12866. What is that one? It was written in 1993. The American people deserve a regulatory system that works for them, not against them. A regulatory system that protects and improves their health, safety, environment, and well-being, and improves the performance of the economy without imposing unacceptable or unreasonable costs on society. Regulatory policies that recognize that the private sector and private markets are the best engine for economic growth. Regulatory approaches that respect the role of state, local, and tribal governments, and regulations that are effective, consistent, sensible, and understandable. I mean, again, in theory, it sounds great, but what does that actually mean to them? Federal agencies should promulgate only such regulations as are required by law. are necessary to interpret the law or are made necessary by compelling public needs, such as material failures of private markets to protect or improve the health and safety of the public, the environment, or the well-being of the American people. I mean, it would be nice if that's what they actually wanted to do. All right, back to Project 2025. But executive reforms and actions, while vital, are not enough. Congress also must act. The next president should work with Congress to pass significant regulatory policy and process reforms, which could go a long way towards reining in the administrative state. Excellent examples of such legislation include the Regulatory Accountability Act, SMART Act, GOOD Act, Early Participation in Regulations Act, Unfunded Mandates Accountability and Transparent Act, and REINS Act. They have like end notes for those. So if anybody wants to check those out, we can check those out at the end when we get there. Finally, the next president should work with Congress to maximize the utility of the Congressional Review Act, CRA, which allows Congress to undo midnight regulatory actions, including those disguised as guidance, on an accelerated timeline. To leverage the CRA's power to the maximum extent, Congress and the president should enact the Midnight Rules Relief Act, which would help to ensure that multiple regulatory actions could be packaged and voted on at the same time. So they're going to say, look, we're voting on a healthcare act and we're going to slip in there tax cuts for the rich. And you're not going to know about it because nobody has time to read all of the laws that they put forward because they're like this document and thousands of pages usually. To leverage the CRA's power to the maximum extent, I already read that. Okay. Immediate and robust use of the CRA would allow the president to focus his rulemaking resources on major new regulatory reforms rather than devoting months or years to undoing the final rulemakings of the Biden administration. So we're going to do this to make it easier for him to take over, essentially. All right. Legislative clearance and coordination. OMB plays a critical role in ensuring that the executive branch is aligned on legislative proposals and language, agency testimonies, and other communications with Congress. The director should use these authorities to enforce policy and message consistency aggressively, and promote the effective engagement of the executive branch in legislative processes. National Security Council. The National Security Council, NSC, was established by statute to support the president in developing and implementing national security policy by coordinating across relevant departments and agencies, integrating authorities and resources towards common ends, and objectively assessing progress towards established goals. Led by the National Security Advisor, NSA, the NSC staff will be successful in implementing the president's national security goals only if it is made up of personnel with technical expertise and experience, as well as an alignment to the president's declared national security policy priorities. Again, loyalist. The NSC must then chart a course that articulates and achieves the president's national security goals and objectives. The president should empower a strong NSC that not only has the power to convene the policy process, but also is entrusted with the full policy of the presidency to drive the bureaucracy. The full power of the presidency to drive bureaucracy. In organizing by means of presidential directive, an NSC staff that is more responsive and aligned with the president's goals are empowered to implement them. The NSA should immediately evaluate and eliminate directorates that are not aligned with the president's agenda and replace them with new directorates as appropriate that can drive implementation of the president's signature national security priorities. In addition to realigning the staff organization to the president's priorities, the NSA should assign responsibility for the implementation of specific policy initiatives to senior NSC officials and across the NSC staff structure. These officials should develop, direct, and execute tangible action plans in coordination with multiple agencies to achieve measurable, time-defined milestones. Aligning NSC staff to the president's national security goals will provide clear direction, a mandate for action, and a baseline of accountability that can be used to evaluate staff performance and the NSC's overall progress. Accountable senior officials, themselves either political appointees or a minimum number of career detailees, who are selected and vetted politically and report directly to political staff, should be the main day-to-day managers for the interagency coordination and implementation of their assigned national security policy objectives. They should provide policy analysis for consideration by the broader NSC and relevant agencies, and ensure timely responses to decisions made by the President. The accountable senior officials should be established at the direction of the NSA and draw on personnel and expertise from beyond the NSC, including OMB, the National Economic Council, and relative federal agencies. The NSC staff and principals should work in tandem with the National Economic Council and OMB at all levels, presenting a united effort to achieve the President's goal and drawing on the latter statutory authorities to guide the bureaucracy. To accomplish national objectives effectively, foreign policy should fully incorporate the economic instruments of national power. National security policy must also include the prioritized allocation of resources. When policies are divorced from the resources required to implement them, they are stillborn, academic exercises that undermine our national security and leave departments and agencies to their own devices. Now, they're using words like stillborn. They're not talking about birth. They're talking about policy not being the way they want it to be. But they're using language like that because it evokes emotion in people, especially those people that are pro-life. So they're using that to try to get them on board because, yes, I don't want to have a stillborn because that means a dead baby. And that's not what they're talking about at all. The accountable senior officials should be empowered to identify, recruit, clear, and hire staff who are aligned with and willing to shepherd the President's national security priorities. The NSC staff leads, under the director of the NSA, should have the discretion to reduce the number of positions that need high-level clearances, and the NSC should be adequately resourced and authorized to adjudicate and hold security clearance internally with investigators who work directly for the NSC and whose sole task is to clear NSC officials. Sole task, to clear them instead of just finding the truth. If certain staff are determined not to need high-level clearances, the question becomes whether they should be part of the NSC at all. The NSC should take the leading role in directing and drafting and thorough review, let's try that again. Maybe water. I'm permanently dehydrated, so water is a necessity. The NSC should take a leading role in directing the drafting and thorough review of all formal strategies. The National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, the Nuclear Posture Review, the Missile Defense Strategy, etc. We're talking security, fighting. What? I just got a live video violation? Maybe because I didn't interact enough? I don't know. I'm trying. I don't even think anybody's in here. Come on, TikTok, be nice. Just reading a book. It's not an interesting book, but it's an important book. Okay, where was I? Maybe because I said WAR. I don't know. Let's try this again. Okay. Anyways, my point was going to be, they're talking a lot about like military stuff, but not about foundational things that we actually need that would make our lives better. In particular, the National Defense Strategy, which by tradition has evaded significant review, should be prioritized for White House review by the NSC and OMB. Both should also conduct reviews of operational war plans and global force planning and allocations with the Secretary of Defense to align them with presidential priorities, and review all key policy and guidance intended for implementation by the heads of the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the intelligence community, before they are authorized for distribution. The NSC should rigorously review all general and flag officer promotions to prioritize the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense matters, including climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism, and other polarizing policies that weaken our armed forces and discourage our nation's finest men and women from enlisting to serve in defense of our liberty. How does critical race theory affect the military? Anybody explain that to me? Or climate change affects the military? Maybe in things that they use, like maybe we can use greener items, but it I don't know. It's very pay attention to the military, not anything that actual people need. The NSC staff will need to consolidate the functions of both the NSC and the Homeland Security Council, incorporate the recently established Office of the National Cyber Director, and evaluate the required regional and functional directorates. Given the aforementioned prerequisites, the NSC should be properly resourced with sufficient policy professionals, and the NSA should prioritize staffing the vast majority of NSC directorates with aligned political appointees and trusted career officials. For instance, the NSA should return all non-essential detailees to their home agencies on the first day in office so that the new administration can proceed efficiently without the personnel landmines left by the previous stewards, and as soon as possible should replace all essential detailees with staff aligned to the new president's priorities. The HSC has overseen pandemic response, and its incorporation is important. Now we believe in the pandemic? Is that what I'm hearing? That's kind of what it sounds like. In the end, change requires intervention. Agreed. And the NSC staff should be appropriately recruited, manned, and empowered to achieve the president's national security and foreign policy objectives and maintain robust policy analysis and discussions while minimizing resistance from those who have an agenda or who jealously guard their resources and autonomy at the expense of national security and sound policy development. Who guard their autonomy at the expense of national security. So me having autonomy affects national security somehow? This resistance and inertia can be inadvertently enabled by a small and unempowered NSC. Additionally, the White House Chief of Staff and NSA must ensure that the NSC is functioning in tandem with the rest of the White House staff to benefit from the best strategic thinking of the president's top advisors. History shows that an unsupervised NSC staff can stray from its statutory role and adversely affect a president and his policies. Moreover, while the NSC should be fully incorporated into the White House, it should also be allowed to do its job without the impediment of duly hatted staff that report to other offices. For instance, the NSC needs its own counsel to inform what legal options can be provided to the president. The White House counsel should be a part of that policy process as the president's top legal advisor. These recommendations provide a clear roadmap for rapidly sizing and solidifying the NSC staff to support and achieve the president's objectives beginning on Inauguration Day. That was all just Office of Management and Budget, which prior to a few years ago, I don't think most people had even ever heard of. All right, now we're going to look at the National Economic Council, NEC. The National Economic Council is one of the policy councils serving the president, along with the NSC and the Domestic Policy Council, the DPC. The director serves as principal advisor to the president on domestic and international economic policy and communicates the president's economic message to the media. The deputy director is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the council, which includes chairing the committee that coordinates economic policy development at the deputy secretary level. In effect, the director and deputy director are the officials who are primarily responsible for the development of economic policy for the administration. Once a policy is adopted, it is the appropriate agency's responsibility to implement it. Even though earlier today, just today in the reading, they were talking about the president being the one who would be implementing policy. The NEC's policy process is also used to determine whether the president should support or oppose legislation passed by Congress. In addition to its leadership, the NEC has policy experts. Hey everybody, we're just reading Project 2025 right now. Section 1, subsection 2. Ta-da. In addition to its leadership, the NEC has policy experts, for example, special assistants to the president, or SAPs, who are responsible for developing and coordinating, as well as advising the president on specific issues. It is essential that the policy experts of the NEC reflect the current environment's most pressing issues. Today, this would include, among other topics, taxes, energy and environment, technology, infrastructure, healthcare, financial services, workforce, agriculture, antitrust and competition policy, and retirement programs. NEC's SAPs should have a working knowledge of how the administration can implement policy through the rulemaking process, although it is not necessarily that they be experts on regulation themselves, particularly given OMB's role. This will facilitate the NEC's effectiveness in coordinating administration policy. The NEC needs to work closely with other offices within the Executive Office of the President to promote innovation by the private sector and create an environment that will stimulate economic activity while reducing federal spending and debt. This includes working with the DPC, NSC, OMB, Council of Economic Advisors, Council of Intergovernmental Affairs, Office of Cabinet Affairs, White House Council, Council on Environmental Quality, Office of Legislative Affairs, and Office of Science and Technology Policy. To this end, the NEC director should chair a standing meeting with the principals from each of the other EOP offices to enhance coordination from within the White House. In the past, there has been tension among the DPC, NEC, and NSC over jurisdiction. It is important to set clear jurisdictions at the start of an administration to prevent needless and counterproductive turf fights. In addition, the principal deputy for international economic policy is jointly appointed at NEC and NSC and could end up serving two different interests. To avoid such problems, international economic policy should be entirely coordinated from NEC. It will be especially important for the NEC to work seamlessly with the Council of Economic Advisors, which provides the President and the White House offices with the latest economic data and forecasts, as well as estimates of the economic impacts of proposed policies, and prepares the annual economic report of the President. The CEA is not a policy council and therefore does not run policy processes, which is the responsibility of the NEC, DPC, and NSC. However, the CEA does play a key role in ensuring that any policy considered by the Council is rigorously evaluated for its economic impacts. The NEC works closely with the White House Office of Communications and the Office of Speechwriting to ensure that the White House's message and media engagement communicate the president's economic policy effectively. He rarely communicates effectively, even when he has a script he's reading. So there's that. The NEC also plays a key role in advancing the president's economic agenda by advising the Office of Presidential Personnel on appointments to key economic posts, including positions in financial regulatory agencies. The NEC helps to ensure that each economic post is held by a person who shares the president's policy priorities and works well within the rest of the administration's economic team. The financial regulators are run partly by civil servants, so some of whom were political appointees in prior liberal administrations, who often resist a conservative administration's policies. It is therefore critical that an administration not only appoints capable individuals to lead these agencies, but also has personnel who can be hired into senior staff positions within the agencies. A few areas will be especially important if the NEC is to develop a well-defined economic policy agenda. One is the promotion of innovation as a foundation for economic growth and opportunity. Another is the creation of an environment that fosters economic growth through tax reform and the elimination of regulatory and procedural barriers. Again, something that taken out of context and just that little bit might be something that we could agree on both sides. Regulation can be a good thing. It helps to keep people safe. All right. Now we're moving to the Office of U.S. Trade Representative, USTR. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative provides the President with the internal White House resources necessary to formulate and execute a unified, whole-of-government approach to trade policy. The President should ensure that the USTR is empowered to serve in that leadership role, much as other EOP components organize and drive a coordinated policy agenda on behalf of the President. The People's Republic of China's predatory trade practices have disrupted the open market trading system that has provided mutual benefit to all participating countries, including China, for decades. The failure of the World Trade Organization, WTO, to discipline China for abrogation of its trading commitments has seriously undermined its credibility and made it largely an ineffective institution. The United States, through an empowered USTR, must act to rebalance and refocus international trading relationships in favor of democratic nations that embrace free, fair, and open trade principles built on market-driven economies. Again, taking just that little bit, I could get on board. You want to... Where was I? Well, that's fun. Anyway, you know, there are things I can get behind if you take that little bit and don't look at anything else. Oh, that's where I was. Okay. Yeah, we want to embrace free, fair, and open trade. A lot of us are very much, we want to shop small. We want things that are ethically sourced. We want things that are renewable resources. You know, a lot of us want to see that happen. They don't say how they're going to do that. And they leave it very vague for a reason. Chapter 26 of this book outlines recommended trade policy priorities for the incoming president. However, regardless of the approach, successful implementation of that trade agenda will require the president to articulate a clear policy direction and instructions for the executive branch to operate in a coordinated fashion under the leadership of an empowered USTR. To address these and other challenges, protect the American worker, and secure free and open markets for our communities and businesses, the next president must leverage the institutional resources and strength of the USTR and neither allow institutional interests to drive a fragmented trade policy that is developed from the ground up, nor cater to I'm going to say that word wrong. Parochial. P-A-R. Turn my sound on real quick. Parochial. There we go. All right. Where did that word go? No, I don't want to search in a 900-page document. To address these and other challenges, that's where I was. Protect the American worker and secure free and open markets for our communities and businesses. The next president must leverage the institutional resources and strength of the USTR and neither allow institutional interests to drive a fragmented trade policy that is developed from the ground up, nor cater to parochial interests across government and Washington's broader industry of influence. Washington's broader industry of influence. Sorry, my eyes are starting to cross a little. The USTR's mission is vitally important in reorienting the global trading system in a direction that is open, fair, and prosperous. In order to achieve the president's policy goals, a strong USTR must be empowered to set trade policy from the White House with the authority and resources to represent the interests of the president's trade agenda with adequate budget, staff, analysis, and expertise to engage meaningfully in internal and interagency policy deliberations. The USTR should organize and harness existing interagency trade committees to serve the president's trade agenda and drive a consensus among federal stakeholders, dispose of legacy advisory committees with members who serve special interests, direct action to implement policy priorities, measure progress towards implementing the president's agenda, and hold agencies and officials accountable for delivering the president's agenda. The USTR's leadership should not only coordinate and enforce the president's agenda across the federal community, but also set and enforce the president's trade agenda internally. Trade policy and priorities should be set by the president and implemented by the U.S. trade representatives in cooperation with other economic and national security officials, not by the range of governmental and non-governmental interests that attempt to force their policy preferences on the USTR. A strong USTR empowered with the necessary resources, authorities, and interagency cooperation will protect U.S. interests in the global marketplace more effectively. Again, these big corporations want to make things and get things as cheap as they possibly can so that they can make as much profit as they possibly can. I don't necessarily see any of this really happening because the people in charge aren't going to let it happen. But it's scary that this is what they want to do. All right, now we're looking at the Council of Economic Advisors, CEA. Congress established the Council of Economic Advisors in 1946 to advise the president on economic policy based on data, research, and evidence. The CEA is one of the oldest congressionally created offices within the White House complex and plays a broad role in bringing economic expertise to administration policy across a long range of policy areas. The CEA has one presidentially appointed and Senate-confirmed chair, two presidentially appointed members who assist and often have expertise that complements the chair, and approximately 40 staff employees. Statutorily, the CEA is charged with being the president's principal source of economic advice. However, this role has diminished over time as its policy appraisal and especially formulation and recommendation functions have been taken over and diluted by other economic policy bodies within the White House. By law, the CEA is required to publish an annual economic report of the president within 10 days after submission of the budget. This report is not just a messaging document. It is an opportunity to provide greater rigor in support of policy areas that the White House is prioritizing and to build up the external credibility of those ideas. So, he's going to have a policy idea. This office is going to set up, what do they call it? Messaging documents. Basically, this is how we're going to sell this to the people, right? Because we want to make sure that we're increasing the external credibility of these ideas. We want people to go, oh, that's what you want to do? Cool. Whether that's true or not is a totally different story and will be dependent on what specifically they're talking about. A future conservative administration should utilize the CEA as the senior internal White House economist, much as the White House counsel's office functions as the senior internal White House lawyers. This does not mean that there are no economists in other offices. There are, just as there often are lawyers in the policy councils and other White House offices. But the CEA's role, like the White House counsel's, is to employ its unique expertise, particularly on the technical side, to ensure that sound analysis is contributing to and shaping the policy decision. In practice, this means that CEA staff do not coordinate the policy process in the way that the GPC or NEC would, but they should be integral to the EOP's policy development process. CEA staff should support sound policy development and execution by actively contributing to running policy dialogues, proactively raising issues that need to be addressed, consulting on questions that arise, and guiding EOP and agency officials on the analytical foundation of policy. Structurally, the White House Chief of Staff should ensure that the CEA has a seat at the policymaking table on all relevant policy. Hello. Thanks for joining. Senior economists traditionally have not gone through the Office of Presidential Personnel process and more often than not are hired on an academic year cycle. As a result, senior economists hired in the summer of a presidential election year tend to remain on staff until the new summer, even if a president from the opposite party takes power and installs a new slate of CEA political appointees for chair members, etc. Although these hiring practices create some continuity, the presence of senior economists who were never fully vetted for their alignment with the White House policy objectives or who were holdovers from a recently departed administration can breed skepticism and distrust of the CEA by other units within the White House, creating the risk that the CEA's role in the policymaking process will be diminished. A future administration should consider hiring that reflects the White House calendar, mid-January, and involves the Office of Presidential Personnel. All right. Let's see, we've read about 15 pages so far. I'm not sure how long this section is, but we'll get through it. Let's see. Hold on, excuse me. Okay, my wife is on her way home. She's home in like 20 minutes. I don't know if we're going to get through this in 20 minutes. We'll see. National Space Council, NSPC. The National Space Council is responsible for providing advice and recommendations to the president on the formulation and implementation of space policy and strategy. Why do I feel like he's going to put Elon Musk in this spot? It's terrifying how brilliant people think that man is. It is charged with conducting a whole-of-government approach to the nation's space interests, civil, military, intelligence, commercial, or diplomatic. Historically, it has been chaired by the vice president at the president's direction, and its members consist of members of the cabinet and other senior executive branch officials as specified by the president in Executive Order 13803. The NSPC's purpose is to ensure that the president's priorities relative to space are carried out and, as necessary, to resolve policy conflicts among departments and agencies that are related to space. Space projects and programs are risky, complex, expensive, and time-consuming, although commercial space innovations are lowering costs and accelerating schedules. Nevertheless, while fiscal discipline should not be ignored, long-term policy stability is crucial to investors, innovators, industry, and agencies. Policy stability is easier when policies and programs are aligned with long-term national interests, as opposed to those of particular advocacy groups or political factions. The Trump administration's major space policies, including the U.S. Space Force, the Artemis program to land the next Americans on the moon, and support for a strong commercial space sector, have endured under the Biden administration. Major challenges remain in implementation and regulatory reform to keep up with rapidly evolving space markets and competitors. These include the long-term sustainability of space activities in light of increasing orbital debris, creation of space situational awareness services for civil and commercial uses, management of mega constellations, licensing of new commercial remote sensing capabilities, keeping up with the licensing demand due to high launch rates, transitioning international space stations operations to multiply, privately owned space platforms, and most important, accelerating the acquisition and fielding of national security space capabilities in response to an increasingly aggressive China. So, we still have not talked about anything that would actually fundamentally help the United States, the people of the United States. We're talking about space right now. Ooh. The vice president should have a clear understanding with the National Security Advisor and the White House counsel that they and their respective staffs will work within the White House to determine the scope and leadership of policy reviews that could overlap multiple areas of responsibility. A similar understanding is necessary with the heads of other policy council, such as NEC, DPC, and National Science and Technology Council, NSTC. Hello, Jenna. Welcome. We're just reading Project 2025. I have it linked in my link tree on Document Cloud if you want to follow along, if you want to read it on your own. There's also a new thing I got from Document Democracy Forward that is like the People's Guide to Project 2025, and it's only 48 pages versus almost 1,000. So if you want to check that out, that's on my link tree too. As a result of the president's direction and the vice president's leadership, the NSPC under the Trump administration was able to coordinate a wide range of space policy reviews, legislative proposals, and regulatory reforms smoothly. The NSPC generally led on space issues within the EOP, but other White House offices also took on space topics. As a member of the NSPC and in coordination with other members, the Office of Science and Technology Policy developed a national space weather strategy, research and development, plans to mitigate the effect of orbital debris, and protocols for planetary protection to avoid biological contamination of celestial bodies. Can we avoid biological contamination of our planet? That'd be cool. The Council of Economic Advisors did research on the economic benefits of space property rights. We talk about the ability for Americans to own property. That would be nice. OMB's Office of Information and Regulatory Reform updated and streamlined commercial launch licensing and commercial remote sensing satellite rules. During the Trump administration, if a topic was purely military, such as standing up the U.S. Space Command, the NSC took the lead. If a topic cut across military, civil, and commercial sectors, as was the case with cybersecurity and space, the NSPC and NSC would co-chair the policy review groups. Trusted collegial relationships across the White House complex are critical to successful space policy development, implementation, and oversight. Nowhere is there more important than in the relationship between the NSPC staff and OMB staff, who will oversee civil and national security related space spending. Teamwork between the NSPC and OMB staff can communicate clear presidential priorities to departments and agencies, facilitating smooth development of the president's budget request. The NSPC and OMB have many opportunities to collaborate in promoting presidential priorities while finding offsets in lower priority programs and funding lines. All right, let's see. It's already been an hour and 20 minutes. And we still have quite a bit to read in this chapter. So here's what I'm thinking. We're done with that section. I think, let me get back to where I was. It was 89, I think I said. Yeah. So I'm gonna stop now. I'll probably do another one tomorrow morning. So if you want to join tomorrow morning, maybe around 10, between 10 and 11 Pacific time, we'll read the second half of this because it looks like this is quite a long section. And I'm already at an hour and 20 minutes, and I don't want to make it a 3-hour live because nobody's going to want to watch that back. So we're going to do this as part 1. We're going to start off tomorrow with Office of Science and Technology Policy. That is on the page number on the document is 58, but if you're reading it off of Document Cloud, it's actually page 89, the bottom of page 89. So if you want to, again, everything is linked in my link tree. I'm also going to look at that document that Democracy Forward put out, which is like the People's Guide to Project 2025. That should be a lot easier to like take in and understand. And I'll probably start doing some little videos on that document. So keep an eye out for that, but it is linked in my link tree if anybody wants to look at it for themselves. Remember, this is scary stuff. They want to change every department within our country pretty much and put Trump loyalists in there that are going to do what he wants, regardless of whether it's constitutional or not. This literally feels like stepping into Gilead. So it's important. I appreciate anybody who hung out, even if you just hung out for a little bit. We'll do this again tomorrow, starting on page 90, and we will keep reading. We'll just read for an hour and a half-ish, and we'll get through this. We're going to get through this together, and I'm going to start posting little snippet videos for different topics, so keep an eye out for that. I just got to figure out how to edit stuff, but I'll get there. I'm going to make this work. We're going to get through this together and hopefully avoid this in November. I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, whenever you're seeing this. Once TikTok makes this available to me, I will download it and upload it in full to the Play app. So if you missed anything, same username over there. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.